Hey guys, it's Professor Tiffany Martin with Medical Microbiology, and we are in Chapter 13, which is the chapter on viruses. And so we did an intro, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, so what is a virus? It's not a cell, it's not alive. So what makes up a virus? So let's talk about that. Okay, so a virus is made up of very, well, before we talk about that, a virus is very small, right? So you need an electron microscope to even see it. So the things that make up a virus are going to be very few. We need the bare minimum. Has anybody ever flown Spirit Airlines or one of those airlines, the budget airlines? They have great fares, but man, you've got to have it's a bare bones kind of airline. You're going to pay extra for every little thing. So that means when you travel Spirit Airlines, instead of taking a big carry-on or something, they'll charge you for that. So they only let you take like a small backpack. So when you pack, and to get that low fare, you're going to pack everything in the backpack that you need, which means anything you can borrow at your destination, you're going to borrow. Shampoo? No, get that at the destination. It is kind of a bare bones packing. Anyway, bare bones. So that's what we're thinking of with a virus. It doesn't have a lot of space, so it only has on the things that it's necessary for it to get into a host cell and survive. So let's talk about what those things are. All right, so it's not a cell, so what is it? All right, possible pieces. Every virus identified has both of these things, okay? So this is bare bones. What do you have to be a virus? Well, you have to have a nucleic acid core. So back to my things, we've got our nucleic acid. Now, most of the time we're thinking about DNA, right? Your instruction manual, you've got to have some instructions, but a virus may not be made up of DNA. Some viruses are made up of RNA only. So instead of single-stranded helix, double helix DNA, it actually only has a small piece of RNA, and that's what it uses for instructions. So it definitely encodes nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA. It never has both inside the virus. It only has one or the other. So either DNA or RNA. And it's funny, it could either be double-stranded DNA, that we're kind of familiar with, but it can also have just a single strand of DNA. It can also have RNA, single-stranded RNA. It can also have double-stranded RNA. So again, some sort of nucleic acids. You've got to have a few instructions. All right, so that is required. What else? You also have to have a way to protect that nucleic acid. So there are proteins that will surround the nucleic acid, and that is called a capsid. It makes these proteins join together to form this structure called a capsid. So all viruses identified that we know of have some nucleic acid, maybe DNA, maybe RNA, and it has this proteins that surround it. Not a phospholipid bilayer, but just a series of connected proteins. And these proteins are usually the same protein over and over again. The one protein we call a capsomere. That's one protein. If you join a whole bunch of capsomeres together, they form this structure called a capsid. So these two things are required, all right? All viruses have that. Now, some viruses have a third structure. Now, not all viruses have this, but the third structure that some viruses have and some don't is called an envelope. Now, this actually is a phospholipid bilayer. And I just told you they're not a cell, so they don't have a phospholipid bilayer. So what's the deal with that? This is called an envelope, and it does contain a phospholipid bilayer. Now, not all viruses have them. If a virus is going to have an envelope, it will always have it. But if it doesn't have an envelope, it'll never have it. So again, some types of viruses do, some types of viruses don't. So it's a phospholipid bilayer, but the virus doesn't make it. It is actually a piece of the previous host cell. Remember, it's an obligate intracellular parasite. It can only replicate inside a host cell. So it's inside a host cell that has a membrane, phospholipid bilayer, and as it leaves the host cell, it takes a piece of that membrane with it. And this is now referred to an envelope. Now, the virus doesn't maintain it. It's kind of like putting on, have you ever heard the phrase, a sheep in wolf's clothing? So, no, that's not right. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Have you ever heard the phrase, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing? And that goes back to shepherding, and you've got sheep, and the shepherd is trying to protect it from the wolf. And in those cartoons, the wolf will take the sheep's clothing, the outer skin of the sheep, and kind of sneak in, trying to trick the shepherd into thinking that it is a sheep and it can get in and get the sheep. Anyway, so that became a phrase. A wolf in sheep's clothing is to trick, to cover yourself up in something that looks normal and familiar, and to trick in the shepherd. In this case, you're tricking the immune system into thinking that this virus isn't dangerous. So it'll cover itself in a previous piece of the host cell membrane, and we refer to that as an envelope. Okay, all right, so that is the structure. Some viruses have it, some don't. But that is another structure. And that's it, man, okay? I mean, bare bones packing for that. So let's talk about the first two things. We're going to talk about the nucleic acid core, and we'll see how long that lasts. All right, so the nucleic acid core. So I said it was nucleic acid. I said it could be DNA, could be RNA, but it's definitely the instructions. And we need a few instructions. Again, bare bones, only what we need, but we actually do need some instructions. So what types of things are specific to the virus? Not things it can get from the host, like shampoo or conditioner, not things that you can borrow from the host cell, but what do you have to just be a virus? Okay, so what do these genes contain, either DNA or RNA? We've got to include some instructions for making the virus genetic material. So we've got to include some instructions on how to copy the virus genetic material, how to make it, to synthesize it. So that's one thing it has to have. We need to have some instructions on how to make those capsid and the capsomeres, the proteins that make up the capsid. The host cell is not going to know how to make a virus, so we're going to need some instructions on how to do that. We're going to need some instructions on how to put a virus together. If the virus gets into a host, it wants to replicate inside the host to make a whole bunch more viruses inside the host. We've got to have some instructions on how to put those together. We got to make those proteins, we got to make the nucleic acid, and then we need some genes on assembly and packaging from that. All right, so all of those are virus-specific things. The last thing, and probably the most important thing, is we've got to have some instructions that are going to make the cell, the host, do this. So think about a virus. The virus shows up, it gets inside the host cell, and then it's got to convince the cell not to make its own proteins and its own nucleic acid. It says, no, you are going to make my proteins, the virus proteins and the virus nucleic acid, and you're going to make them at the exclusion of all else. And then when you've made as much as you can make, you're going to fall apart and burst. I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to leave and go find another host. This is the worst house guest ever, a virus. Once a virus gets in, all that virus is going to do is make more viruses until it has used up all the resources, and then it's going to burst out of that cell and spread those virions, those viruses, into the environment to go find more host cells. Again, worst health guest ever. So the virus has to have some instructions to come in and say, no, stop doing what you're doing, cell, maintaining your own self and doing whatever you need to do. You're going to do what I need you to do. You're going to make my nucleic acid. You're going to make my proteins and assemble those. So those instructions are contained within the nucleic acid. All right, so all of that has to happen. All right, so that is huge, and that has to happen. So we said that nucleic acid is a required component. All viruses have a nucleic acid. The nucleic acid for all those viruses are going to have those types of instructions to do. The other thing that's required is a capsid. So the capsids, we just did the nucleic acid, let's do the capsids. The capsids are required there to protect the nucleic acid, the instructions inside. So what's it made up? I've already said it's made up of proteins. These proteins are referred to as capsomeres. They're the exact same protein. They fit together to make a shape surrounding it. So a capsid is the structure made up of individual capsomere proteins that protect the nucleic acid. Now there's a couple different shapes. Different viruses have different shapes. One is this polyhedral shape here. It's technically an icosahedron. It's three-dimensional, has 20 sides and 12 corners. So this is a polyhedral shaped capsid, and this is the one that I kind of did a two-dimensional structure with this kind of shape to it. But again, it's a polyhedral icosahedron. So that is one type of capsid that we see in viruses. It's not the only one. We see another type of shape that's very familiar with different viruses. So different viruses have the instructions to produce a different type, a different shaped capsid, and this one is called a helical shaped. The proteins that it produces have more of these oval shapes, and these oval shapes assemble into this tube. This is actually a picture of the tobacco mosaic virus. So this is the one that kind of started the whole thing about viruses. And it is a helical shaped capsid. Again, protection. The nucleic acid goes inside this hollow tube and is protected in there. All right, so it's either a capsid shaped or it's a helical shaped. The third type of capsid that we see has a complex shape. And this is basically a catch-all category that has anything that's not a polyhedral shaped and not a helical shaped. Now, this particular picture, you may have seen this before. It's kind of the poster child for viruses. If they're going to show a virus, they show a picture like this. And this is because this is a virus that's been very well characterized. It's actually a bacteriophage, which is a virus that infects bacteria. Phage is another name for virus, and a bacteriophage is a virus that only infects bacteria. We mentioned some of those diseases like chickenpox or HIV. Those are viruses that infect eukaryotic cells, human cells. We're very interested in those. But there are also viruses that infect bacteria, and those are called bacteriophage. Now, this particular one is made up of several different types of structures. There is a polyhedral section, but it also has a helical section and some other structures. The helical section is called the head. This is where the nucleic acid for this complex virion, this is the where the nucleic acid is located. It also has a helical section that we refer to as the tail section, which also has these fibers that extend for these. These are called tail fibers. Now, if I were to ask you what they look like, you're going to tell me legs, right? In every sci-fi movie, you see these things, usually macro-sized, and they're crawling around. This is not used for locomotion. I think I mentioned viruses are not living. They do not move. They do not search out cells. They're not drawn for that. They're not capable of chemotaxis or anything like that. They just exist. They're just there. It is always chance collisions that brings a virus in conjunction to a host and allows it entry. So these are actually involved in attachment and entry. So don't tell me their legs, tell me their tail fibers make up this tail region from that. So this is an example of a complex shape. All right, so those are the two requirements for viruses, the nucleic acid and the capsid. We'll come back for the next video and look at that optional. Some viruses have it, some don't, and we'll describe what an envelope is. Okay, see you then.